My name is Steve Schwartz. I run the LSAT blog. I also host the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel and podcast. And I'm joined by law professor John Durbach. John, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. As good as one can be, just given the circumstances, trying to make the best of quarantine life. I'm here in New York City, so we're really facing the brunt of it right now, apparently, from what I read in the news and what I see on the streets. Where are you located? I know you're at Widener Law, right?
Yeah, I'm at Widener Law, Commonwealth, and I'm in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So I'm in what people here call South Central Pennsylvania, which is about 3 hours from New York City, about 2 hours from Philadelphia.
So I'd imagine that things are fairly quiet there with regard to coronavirus, but you still have moved to distance learning, you mentioned.
When we moved to distance learning, we've shut down all classes. The building, pretty much the school is closed. I have a daughter who lives in New York City, and she's the situation that she's facing is a little more stringent than what we have here, but it's still pretty stringent here.
Yeah, I would imagine everyone's taking this very seriously. So anyway, I don't want to make the whole focus of tonight the coronavirus, of course. I know I want to look ahead to the future a bit. And so what I have on the agenda for tonight is that we'll speak a bit about law school selection. And I'm especially interested to hear your thoughts about choosing a law school when one cannot visit. I know a lot of admitted students' weekends were canceled, and some folks just can't visit a school anyway, given the logistical barriers involved. Then we could talk a bit about your experience with distance learning, online learning over the past week and what students might expect going forward, whether they're doing a hybrid program or whether schools are even offering on-campus classes in the fall. Then we could talk a bit about law school prep, which will be the primary focus for tonight, I'd imagine, given that you've written a couple of books on legal writing and experience for law students. And then I'll give a brief update at the very end of tonight about how the coronavirus is affecting LSAT and law school admissions this cycle and what students could expect going forward. So first off, law school selection. What are your thoughts on that? And, so many students have reached out to me saying they can't visit campus. Admitted students' weekends were canceled. How can they decide to choose a law school when they can't even visit? What are some factors in your experience that students might want to consider?
Well, that's interesting because you see, in my experience, I do remember picking a law school, and I remember the process that I went through for that. And I do remember that it ended with a visit. The biggest mistake I think you can make picking a law school is saying, well, I want to get in, I'll look at the U.S. News rankings and I'll go to the very best school, get into the very best school I can get into. Because I don't think there is a right answer to the question of what is the best law school. And the numerical rankings provide a lot of information, but the information they don't provide is what is best for you in particular. And so things that you might look for in choosing a law school are, do you want to go to law school in the same state where you live now? Do you want to go to law school near where you live? What kind of law do you want to practice? How much does it really matter to you to be in a particular community? And so if there's a law school in a particular place, the law school is going to have tremendous outreach in that particular place. And if that's where you want to be, that might be something you want to think about. What kind of law do you want to practice? I wanted to do environmental law. I was really bound and determined to do environmental law one way or the other. So I looked real hard at schools that had a substantial environmental law reputation. Now I direct the Environmental Law and Sustainability Center at Widener Commonwealth, and it's the same kind of thing. It's for people that are really interested in that. We have things we can offer that a lot of schools that don't do that can't offer. And there are other schools that have different forms of expertise. If you want to do admiralty law, if you care about ships and so forth, then you probably want to go to a law school where they actually teach admiralty law, because not everybody teaches admiralty law. Beyond that, what about the setting of the law school? Do you want to be in a big city? Do you want to be in a more rural area? Do you want to be in a large law school? Do you want to be in a small law school? Those are personal questions. And how does the law school present itself? When you go out to the website, and this is going to be especially important, I think, Steve, as you indicated, at a time when it's harder to visit the law school, is what values does the law school sort of present? Are there particular, what appeals to you about that? Because at day's end, again, all of this is on some level, it's about your future and all the rest of that, but you're not going to be happy unless the place where you go lines up to some degree with the kind of place you want to be, with the sort of place you want to be, and with sort of the values and mission and orientation that really matters to you. So that's kind of a long answer to a short question.
No, I appreciate all the different considerations that you brought up. And I guess one question I have is regarding the school's culture or fit, the setting. Can you really speak to that? Because it's hard to get a sense of that from looking at a school's website, given that, of course, they want to present it in the best possible light. It's hard to know how that really lives up to the experience of actually being at the school.
Yeah, that's if you can't visit the place, that's harder. That's just flat out harder. I found the visit really helpful to me when I was in law school. It gave me a kind of a sense of the place and the people there. How do you replicate that? Ways you might be able to replicate that would be calling the admissions office and seeing the particular individuals that you can talk to. Okay.
That's a good idea. So contact admissions and have them put you in touch with a couple of students.
Yeah, and frankly, I mean, in all of these, call the admissions office and say, this is the bit of information that I can't get, I'm not getting, I want to get it, can you help me find it somehow? And, you know, the admissions office is going to find people that feel pretty good about the law school and all of that. But a lot of the folks that you talk to, again, this is like college visits, you know, are not propagandists for the institution. They'll tell you what their experience is. So,
of course, and even if the students that you get from the admissions office give you one thing, you could also go into a Facebook group or another online community to find students at the school who were not provided by the admissions office directly to get a more unfiltered take, possibly.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. I'm seeing a couple of chat questions. Do you want me to respond to any of those?
Yeah, sure. Let's touch on one. One of them was about pursuing criminal law in Georgia. I'm not too familiar with that. I don't know whether you are, but I'd imagine that looking online at lists of rankings and details there might be useful. Do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we figure out what the law schools in Georgia actually are. You see what they're teaching. And the other thing that you can do beyond all of that is you can talk to practitioners. Talk to people who do criminal law. They're not that hard to find. You can in your particular community, or just network and find them and ask them. You know, I want to practice criminal law in Georgia. You know, what's your experience about schools? You know, the Georgia schools that are really good at that. And I would ask not just one person. I'd ask as many people as I could find.
Yeah, I'd imagine that an applicant could even contact 10 or 20 criminal law attorneys in Georgia, perhaps in Atlanta or another city that the applicant wants to practice in, and just email them all and reach out and say, hey, what school did you go to? Or look on their sites and see what school they went to, and then ask them for just a quick 5 minutes or a quick email response.
Yeah, and I mean, the one thing I'll say about networking to find that kind of stuff is we'll go back and use the Georgia example. Is if you talk to, I don't know, Jane Gomez, okay, in Atlanta, and you have a conversation with her about, you know, practicing criminal law, send her an email thank you when you get done with that conversation.
Certainly.
And don't hesitate to ask her for other people that you might talk to along the way. Because if you want to practice criminal law in Georgia, you're introducing yourself to the bar at that point, and you may as well take advantage of that. And people remember thank yous partly because they don't get as many of them as they probably should.
Yeah, no sense in ghosting them, especially if you might want to maintain that relationship for the future. Plus, it's just a nice thing to do. They took
Exactly.
You take the time to send a thank you. Now, this next one was about practicing big law or corporate law. Does one need to go to the top 14 ranked law schools in order to practice big law?
No. Well, I mean, we have, we're not one of those top ranked law schools. I'll be very frank about that. On the other hand, in all the big firms in Harrisburg, we send people to. And the big firms in Harrisburg are K&L Gates, Pepper Hamilton, a lot of firms that have a national base. And so, no, you don't need to go to a ranked law school to do corporate law for a big firm. You don't have to do that.
And this comes back to, I think, what you mentioned earlier about networking, that networking could actually be more impactful in getting one of those jobs than simply the name of the school and the resume.
Well, yeah, networking, and frankly, if you do well at any law school, that gets everybody's attention.
Maintaining a GPA, in other words.
Yeah.
Being top of the class.
The hard, cold reality, and this we'll come back to this with the exam book, but the hard, cold reality is that the opportunities you have are to some degree in proportion to how well you do in your grades. And smart employers will look at people who do well at any school and say, well, look, this may not be a top-ranked law school, but so-and-so did really well there, and we ought to take a look at it. And that happens all the time.
Certainly. Well, thanks for sharing your thoughts on that. So many questions here. We'll try to run through as many as we can. Let's see. So I'd imagine the same for criminal law as well. It's not only the ranking of the school, it's also the networking, as we said before.
Well, yeah, and the one extra thing I would say about that is where you spend your summers has some impact. I mean, for example, if I'm hiring somebody to do criminal law in a DA's office or public defender's office or in some private practice where we do a lot of criminal law, if you intern for me and I like you, that helps. If you work for me over the summer, you work for me part-time during the school year, that helps. And that's another aspect of networking.
Oh, yeah, certainly. They're having real deep connection with the person makes a big difference, of course.
Exactly.
Now, what about going to law school out of state? So outside of the region specifically where one wants to practice?
Strengths and weaknesses to that. The strength is you leave your state to go to a major law school. The major law school is always on your resume. It's a big deal. The weakness is that people don't know you as well, and it's hard to come back to a place where people don't know you as well and haven't seen you for the last several years. Now, if you go back to where you came from, and you get your internships there and that sort of thing, and maintain connections, then it's a different story.
Yeah. Thanks.
There's certainly more to be said, but that's the short answer.
All right, so I think we've hit on this one pretty well. As far as networking, once again, I think someone's asking about networking in general. I would just say reach out, make those connections through LinkedIn, through email. Any other thoughts on that?
Well, yes, and I would say in sort of in contrast to the way a lot of students do it, which is all too often what I get from students is, well, I went to the copy center over the weekend and I made 100, I wrote 100 letters to 100 people, and sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't. The problem is, and I've been in this place, and I've had this experience as an employer, is you get resumes from different law schools and you don't know what the GPA means. You don't know what the claims that this person makes in the resume. You have no idea necessarily how to evaluate all that stuff. And so the value of networking is that when you talk to people, they actually know who you are. And so introducing yourself to people, getting them to know who you are and all that sort of thing means that when your resume comes in, it's not just another resume in the pile with certain accolades and attributes and so forth in it that kind of look impressive, but who knows how to evaluate them. But it's like, here, okay, I know this person. And so it makes the story a little different. And sometimes that helps.
Yeah, those personal connections matter a lot. Now, I'm going to save the admissions questions for towards the end, just so we can stay with the agenda for now. So I want to thank you for touching on the different factors in choosing a law school. I want to ask you now more directly about your experience with online learning over the past week or so, as the entire country has gotten used to using Zoom, and I'm sure their stock price is doing quite well if they're a public company. So what's that experience been like? How has it differed from the in-person traditional experience, just to start there?
Well, I should say right away that my experience is going to be a little different than certain other people's experience, because I've got small classes this semester. And by small, I mean they're both under 20. And so I've got classes where it's easy to call on everybody. I can see everybody's face on a screen, and where it's pretty conversational, and that's really what I'm looking for. I mean, to sort of back up a step or two, a lot of what goes on in many classrooms, including mine, is we're trying to have a conversation. And if what you're used to is the teacher lectures, and you take notes, and your job is simply to take good notes, and to remember what the teacher said, that's not what goes on in an awful lot of law school classrooms. There's a lot of back and forth, and the conversation is what makes it fun, what makes it interesting, and frankly, it's how it adds value. The challenge you have, I think, if all you do is lecture, is in terms of adding value, is if you could simply hear it without even being there, if you could have it recorded or read it, and you get the same thing out of it, then being in the classroom really doesn't amount to very much. It's not something that adds very much value. So I like the back and forth a lot, and my skepticism going into online learning is how good is the back and forth going to be? How good is the conversation going to be? And so far, I'd say it's better than I thought it was going to be. That's not exactly an endorsement, but it's better than I thought it was going to be. It's not the kind of learning desert that I was afraid it could be. And I haven't had yet to relearn everything relearning how I teach. I can still teach pretty much the same way I've always taught, which is pretty good on my end. There are some interesting things that go on. You see students that have cats crawling in their lap. You see students, you hear the kids screaming in the background occasionally. I mean, and what you get is, okay, this is a place where people can, where they can learn, but this is also a place where distractions can occur. And the thing that I worry about, the thing that we all worry about, is how much learning is really going on. You can be sitting in front of a computer and you can be pretty checked out, frankly. It's easier sitting in front of a computer to be doing something else, to be reading email, to be apparently there, but not quite there, or maybe not even very much there. And we worry about that a lot because the quality of the learning experience is what really matters. And so what we're all looking for is how to enhance the quality of that experience. And what will happen over the next number of weeks and months is I think a lot of us are going to get much better at this. But that's my reaction 1 week in.
That makes a lot of sense, and I'm glad to see that it hasn't been too different on your end. But for the students, it sounds like it might require a bit more self-motivation on their part to really make it a focus and not have several different browser tabs open and kind of switching between them and half listening.
Well, that's right. And the other thing, though, is beyond that, what I'm seeing is, and we had some pretty frank conversations tonight, is that in the classroom, for all the different things that you can say about the classroom, at least when you're in the classroom, you can you're not distracted by all the other stuff that goes on. And so, if you're a single mom with 2 kids, you've got to deal with that. Okay, if you've got a pet at home, you've got to deal with that. If I don't know, different things like that. And so what it sensitizes me to is that some of the learning environments that some of the places where people live and may not be the most conducive to a good learning environment.
Right. So it might require help from someone else to keep the kids busy for that hour and a half or so, just so that their learning can go on uninterrupted under ideal circumstances, of course.
Right.
Yeah, I really relate to what you said about the small classes that you've got going on this semester, though, because one of the things I do as part of my LSAT courses, and we actually have one of these group coaching sessions coming up immediately after this conversation right now, is we'll have a group of about typically 5 or 6 people. We'll all be on video, so we're engaged. Everyone in the room has their video on. They're engaged. we're having that kind of back and forth seminar style conversation. And to me, that's really the ideal. I wish everybody could experience that, because the small group setting with the conversations, to me, that's where the really real learning happens, almost like a Socratic method style sometimes.
Well, that's exactly right, and that's what I like. And you can figure out if people don't understand something, you can respond to their questions in a pretty direct way, and you can figure out pretty quickly what people are getting and what they're not getting. And that's in a smaller class, that's easier. It's in a bigger class, it's harder, but it's also harder even if you're in the classroom. It's harder. You have a big class, and people can, there's a certain safety in numbers. If you're not really fully paying attention, you're not totally engaged, you might not get called out on that. And if you're not really, then you might not be as motivated in the big class because you're not getting called on it, because you're not having to with you directly as much.
Yeah, we had an interesting conversation, comment in the chat here from Emily asking about CLE style software that requires attentiveness. It's like calling, checking in to require that the student was paying attention.
I haven't seen that software, but I'm going to take it back to the people here because of her question. I mean, the CLE stuff that I've seen, I've been at plenty of CLE.
Could you just clarify what CLE is for everyone?
Okay, I'm sorry. CLE is continuing legal education. What happens, I'm in Pennsylvania. We have to have every year, in order to maintain our bar membership, and I'm a proud member of the Pennsylvania Bar, we have to get so many hours of continuing legal education. That's just how it goes. And so you have continuing legal education providers. The Pennsylvania Bar Association, for example, is now replaced the Pennsylvania Bar Institute as a CLE provider. What that means is they offer different courses and programs and that sort of thing. And I speak at a whole bunch of these. Most of them that I speak at are live, but I've seen some pretty checked out people who are just putting in their time and even live. And so I'm interested in what the CLE style software would be. And if Emily wants to send me an email afterwards, I'd be happy to follow up on that.
Yeah, that would be interesting. And it sounds like a good solution. I think that most colleges and universities are using Zoom from what I see. And Zoom, they have a sort of attentiveness score for the participants, but it always shows up at 100%, at least when I download my stats afterwards. And so I'm guessing it's not totally accurate, because I'm sure that out of hundreds of people, somebody went to the bathroom once at some point. It's a reality, right? So that'd be interesting if they could implement that.
Yeah, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I saw something on Zoom earlier today that indicated attentiveness in a prior class, and I had no idea what that meant because I don't know what they're measuring.
Yeah, I think it's meant to indicate attentiveness, that people are paying attention, they're engaged, but I'm not sure how accurate those stats are. Or maybe everyone in my classes is just really engaged, which I would love to see, of course.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's talk a bit about the law school prep portion here. Now, you've written a couple of books on legal writing, books that are quite suitable for entering 1Ls. Could you share a bit more about those?
Sure. Well, let's start. Let's start with a little book that I wrote some years ago that's now in a 4th edition. That's called Writing Essay Exams to Succeed in Law School, and then in parentheses, not just to survive. And what the book grew out of is my own experience teaching legal writing, and a long time ago at Wayne State Law School in Detroit. And basically the way it worked was when you're teaching legal writing, you teach students about how to write a particular kind of document, and you go through it, and then you go through all the different pieces, you explain to them how they do it, then you have them turn in one of those documents, and you evaluate them on exactly the things that you taught them. So there's a one-to-one relationship between what you taught, and what the students are being evaluated on. And when I started teaching property in law school after working a fairly long time for the state of Pennsylvania, what I saw was that you can teach the rules in property. You can teach adverse possession and gifts and real estate transactions and all the rest of that. But where exactly do you teach them how to write the exam or how to answer the exam question? Where do you do that exactly? How does that fit in? In other words, the exam writing process and the technique you employ for writing, for answering a law school essay exam is not necessarily anything that the students are ever taught, or that the professors that they have are even all that necessarily all that willing often to explain. And so you can teach the legal rules for gifts and for the statute of frauds and all this other stuff in property, but if you don't actually teach them how to write the exam, it's all for naught, or it can be all for naught. And that's particularly a problem because the essay exams are where most of their students' grades are going to be coming from. Most of the opportunities that students have are based on how well written their essay exams are. And if the students don't know how to write that essay exam, it compromises their ability to get the kind of opportunities under law school that they really want and that they really need. Now, some people will say, well, but my older brother or my uncle or my dad or my aunt or somebody in my family went to law school, and they explained that all to me. That's great. But for people who are first generation law school, first generation college maybe, who don't have those kind of connections in their family, if they don't have people around them to explain that, then that gets to be a real problem. And so I wrote this little book that started out as a 2-page memo, and then it turned into a 4-page memo, and it turned into a 5-page memo. And then after a while, people started stopping by my office and saying, hey, I passed the bar exam because of this, or I'm getting good grades at this place because of what you wrote. And I thought, well, that's really interesting because, over the course of a life, you do a lot of different things, and some of them work and some of them don't. And I'm a career environmental guy. Okay, pretty much what I do is environmental law. I'm real interested in climate change and sustainability. That's why I direct the Environmental Law and Sustainability Center here. But when you see that what you're doing is something that students respond to, it's hard to just walk away from that and say, oh, okay, well, all right. So I thought, all right, I'll put out a little book. We'll explain all of this in greater detail. And it's easily among the books that are the stuff that I've written around my school and a lot of other schools. It's easily the most popular thing I've written, or among the most popular things I've written, because it explains in really simple, basic ways how it is that you answer a law school essay exam question. And I start with the following premise. And for people who come in with a certain kind of undergraduate background, this is a novel premise. Because a lot of folks come in and they took an Asian history class, and the idea was, you need to know the major events and the relationship between the major characters and what the influence of different events was and that sort of thing. And that's the kind of thing you write an essay about. And that's great. But that's not what happens in a law school essay exam. So what happens in a law school essay exam is you get a particular problem. So-and-so signs a contract to buy a house. Okay. It turns out to be a house that where a famous author lived. And before she finalizes the deal, she finds that there are busloads of tourists that stop by this house expecting to look around, expecting to be catered to, expecting people to pay attention to them. And suddenly she's no longer interested in this house. So that's example number one. Example number two, because they're all different. Example number two is somebody leases an apartment in an area that turns out to be really, really smelly during the day, sort of unbearable. And so the person leaves and says, well, to the landlord, you made the place uninhabitable. Well, okay. Does the person have a legal right to leave? And then complicate it some more. What if that person left behind, when they left their apartment, something of considerable value? And now the landlord is saying, hey, you abandoned this. It's mine now. Or take it out of the property context. There's an environmental law issue somewhere. There's a factory that's pushing stuff out into the air. It's pushing stuff out into the water. It's dumping waste out behind the property. Are they complying with all the relevant laws? And those are the kinds of questions that people come to lawyers for. People come, and now's a bad time to use doctor analogies, so I'll use a dentist analogy. If you have, if there's something in the back right side of your jaw that just hurts like crazy, and you go into the dentist's office and you say, hey, I'd like, can you fix my problem? You don't want the dentist to be talking about tooth enamel and the nerve structure and what kind of teeth you have and all that sort of thing. You don't care about any of that. What you want is an answer to your question. And that's why people come to lawyers. They want answers to questions. And so what an exam question does, what a lot of essay exam questions do, is they say, here's a specific factual situation, and here's the problem that is posed. Now, what are you going to advise your client, or what are you going to advise whoever it is, okay, in terms of how to proceed? Or there's a lawsuit. How should your client respond to the lawsuit? And so what lawyers do, and what law school exams spend a lot of time on, is getting you good at thinking about particular problems and how you solve particular problems that get put in front of you, problems that you haven't seen before, problems that you may not have ever thought about before. And in this little book, 100 pages long, it's a short read, lots and lots of examples, is intended to give prospective law students, actual law students, people preparing even for the bar exam, some idea of how to answer those questions.
Thank you for that wonderful breakdown there, really summarizing it. Love the different examples. I'm wondering, though, could you maybe walk us through one of those examples you mentioned, the haunted house or the smelly house or something of that nature? And what exactly would someone want to be doing in that essay to lay it out? I know you have it all in the book. It's only 100 pages, definitely worth getting, but could you break it down for us maybe, or at least explain IRAC and how it might apply to one of those?
Sure. Well, okay. So there's, let's go back to the first example, the house with all the tourists are stopping by. There's a set of rules for when you can get out of a contract. All right. And basically what those rules involve are, did you know in advance that this was an issue? Did the seller know? Did the seller fail to disclose it? Did the seller conceal it? How bad is this defect anyway? Is this like is this like a leaky roof, or where the foundation is cracked and there's water running in the house all the time, where it's going to cost a lot of money to fix this? Or is this something more subjective? I mean, all these people stopping by the house, they don't have a right to go in. They never have a legal right to go in. And you could just say, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. Well, so is that a big enough defect to let you get out of the contract to buy the house? And so what happens is there's a list of those rules that we explain in class. The nature of the defect, what the seller knew and didn't know, what the buyer knew and didn't know, and that sort of thing. And what you do is you go through each of those rules one at a time. So you need to know, in order to make sense out of that, you need to know the big rule, which is failure to disclose a material defect, and then flag the right rule. And then what you need to be able to do is apply each of the elements of that rule one at a time to the problem that's that issue. And is it IRAC? Yeah, every single element you go through, it's issue, rule, application, conclusion. And some of the elements are going to be easy, and some of them are because there aren't that many facts, or because there's not going to be much controversy about it. And some of them are complicated, and they take longer, and they're more interesting facts, and that's where most of the points are. The thing that, I could walk through IRAC in greater detail, but the thing that you want to pay attention to here is when you're working and practicing for an exam, and I do mean practicing, not just studying, but actually practicing writing out exam answers, is where are you going to get points? All right. Pretty much what teachers do, law teachers do, is they all have some kind of a point system, pretty much. there are a few, I think, out there who are able to sort of look at an exam and say that's a B plus. I'm not one of them, and most of us aren't. Partly because there are very few exams that are pure B plus. You get people that write something, they'll say something and it's really, really good, and then the next thing they'll say doesn't make any sense at all, and then the next thing is kind of average. And if you are operating on a point system, you can weigh it all out a lot easier. So one of the things that I really encourage people to do is make sure that they get the law right, because if you don't get the law right, if you're not writing about the law, the right legal rule, and the right legal element, a lot of us aren't going to give you any credit at all. And then once you're picking on a particular legal rule, or you're writing about a particular rule, how completely are you writing? If there's 3 relevant facts, are you just stating one, or are you stating all 3? Well, if there's 3 facts out there, there's probably a counter-argument. Are you stating the counter-argument, or are you just stating the basic argument? And that kind of thing is how you begin to get more points. And so people who tend to get all the right rules, who get all the right elements of each of the rules, who write most completely about the facts, who identify counter-arguments, who flag policy arguments, tend to do better than people who only write about, say, 1 or 2 or 3 legal rules that are at issue in a problem, only write about 2 out of the 4 elements that are at issue, only use 1 or 2 facts, and don't give you anything about counter-arguments and policy arguments. So there's, and in the exams that I grade, there's a very big difference between the top and the bottom. And when you get done scoring, grading isn't even that hard most of the time.
Well, it sounds like it really all comes down to being comprehensive and detail-oriented, really.
Yeah, it also comes down to having a plan. And so, for example, you read the question, and then you say, well, you make a short list of the legal rules that are at issue. All right, and so I'll just, in the example that I gave, it's a 1-issue problem. It's failure to disclose a material defect. I'll just say that's the legal rule. Okay, so you write that down. Now, writing that down is a big deal, because if you think that the real issue in the problem is the statute of frauds, and you write about the statute of frauds, you're not going to get any points for that. If you say the real issue is, well, was there some violation of the deed? Well, there's no violation of the deed at this point, because all we have is a real estate contract and we haven't gotten a closing. So knowing what the right legal rule is matters a great deal. And so, yes, being detail-oriented is important, but you also have to understand the big picture. What particular sorts of fact situations does this particular rule apply to? And you have to be able to recognize those fact situations when you see them. And the challenge in a law school setting is that day after day, week after week, the distinctions between a lot of the stuff can get kind of blurry. And so making sure that day by day, week by week, you understand the particular kinds of facts that a particular legal rule applies to is really, really important. And that's why the cases are so important that you read in law school, because they give you an idea of what the facts that are relevant to that particular legal rule actually fit, where the kinds of fact situations that legal rule fits.
It's kind of funny. These remind me a lot of principal application questions on the LSAT logical reasoning section, where the principle is that general rule, and then we're applying it to a new situation that is somewhat parallel in nature, perhaps a more specific application of that general rule. And so following all the directions it goes in to see how specific you can make it apply to see whether it does or not.
Well, that's exactly right. And I'll give you an example of that. In the cases that I teach on the issue of material defect involve 2 kinds of problems. One is a leaky roof that the seller failed to disclose, and the other is a haunted house where the seller had made a really big deal out of this house being haunted, had really worked hard to publicize that. And then somebody came in from out of town and bought the house, and then found out that they bought the haunted house. And so those are the 2 cases that you work from. And then so what happens is the problem in the exam book is this young woman who buys a property that is that was occupied by a former author, a famous author, and you've got all these tourists that want to stop by, and so you're saying, well, okay, leaky roof, haunted house, tourists. How do the first two things relate to the third thing? And that's where you've got to be able. You have to be able to think about the analogies between the first two, and as well as the distinctions.
Right. So you're looking at what ways are they similar and what ways are they different? To what extent does the rule about the former apply to the latter?
Exactly.
Yeah. And it may not be unambiguous, right? It could be kind of murky at times.
Well, and frankly, the murky part of it is where the fun is, and where because most law school exam questions do not have an obvious right answer, and so, well, you could go this way or you could go that way, and I don't really care how you come out. I tell students that over and over again. I truly don't care how you come out on any issue where there might be any doubt at all about the outcome. What I'm looking for is the quality of your analysis. I'm looking for the facts that you use. I'm looking for how you use them, and I'm looking for the clarity of your reasoning. And you could have, and I've seen this, where out of a certain class you have a certain number of A's, and on any given essay, the A answers come out in all kinds of different ways.
And the same, actually, so much of this applies also to the LSAT writing sample, where applicants are given a choice between two options and some criteria to consider and to make a choice. But the choices are equally weighted, such that the applicant could not choose wrong whether they choose option A or option B. And it's not about which one you choose. It's about the method of reasoning you use and how reasonable you are, not saying, option A is amazing, option B is terrible, only a total fool would pick option B. In reality, there's pros and cons, and it's really just about simply which characteristics you choose to weigh more heavily.
Well, yeah, and there's a lot of that, and that also goes into practical lawyering. I mean, the hardcore reality is, if you come into my office and you say, well, look, I just got busted for speeding and reckless driving on the turnpike and on Pennsylvania Turnpike, and here's the deal: it was a dark and rainy night, and I was going 90 miles an hour with a bottle of bourbon in my hand, and I flipped the car and went over, and the passenger in my car got hurt. Help me. Well, that kind of person is hard to help. Okay, yeah. And you don't really need a lawyer to know that kind of person is in a heap of trouble. But if you have, by contrast, somebody who is driving too fast because he was trying to get his wife to the hospital in time to have a baby, you might think about the problem differently. And in a lot of law school essay questions, there are arguments that can be made on both sides, and you try to have some ability to look at and respond to different sides.
Thanks for pointing out that difference. I think that's an important one to help give this some real world relatability. We actually got a question from the audience about legal writing and how legal writing in law school, might it differ from legal writing in the workplace in a real world setting? To what extent might it differ, if at all?
Well, what we try to do in legal writing is actually imitate what goes on in the real world. So a lot of time, I mean, the standard piece of legal writing is a legal memo assessing the client's particular condition, particular situation in light of the relevant law, and sort of analyzing that. Now, and that's been sort of the standard piece of legal writing for a long time. Another standard piece of legal writing for a long time is a brief, either an appellate brief or a trial court brief. And again, what you're looking at is something that is pretty much like what you're going to see in the real world. And in fact, what we get here, because we've got quite a good legal writing program, is students going out and into practice, and the lawyers, they're working for, and say, look, the students from your school, are really good at writing. They do exactly what we need them to do. And so I would say that legal writing is an awful lot like law practice. Now, is the lawyer you work for going to say exactly the same things about a particular piece of legal writing that your legal writing teacher did? Maybe not, but not in every respect at least. But by and large, what legal writing is about is creating documents that would be recognizable in the workplace. And in fact, pretty much all of our students use some kind of sample from a legal writing class when they go to look for jobs.
That's good to hear, at least that it has a practical application afterwards.
Well, and beyond that, I mean, I would argue that the exam writing experience is also very similar to the practice of law. And I'll give you sort of examples of that, because one is over and over and over again in the practice of law, you have senior lawyer comes in and says, I need an answer to this question by tomorrow morning. All right. Which is a little bit like exam writing. So you're under pressure. There's a time deadline. Okay. There's a problem you haven't seen before, and you have to figure it out. And then beyond that, this sort of element by element explanation of the law is something that you do all the time in the practice of law. You even do it in a trial. In your closing argument to a jury, for example, on a 3-element rule. You're going to be explaining what each of the 3 elements is. You're going to be explaining what the evidence showed. You're going to be explaining what conclusion you hope the jury draws from the evidence. And it's the same thing in exam.
So it largely applies.
Yeah.
Now, I want to thank you for your time. And before we close off, I want to just ask you a little bit about what applicants could be doing now, the summer. Let's assume that the summer coming up is the summer before their 1L. They're going to start law school this fall. You've given a lot of the picture of what law school will be like, but what might you want one of your students to know or do before walking into law school, if anything?
Boy, that's such a good question. I mean, I would, law school is a really intense experience. And one of the complaints that you get, and I'm sure you've heard this 100 times, probably more often, is that you don't do anything else your first year of law school. And so if there's something else you really want to do this summer, do it. I don't know what ability you're going to have to do that. These are not normal times. Things that you can do that get you more ready for law school include the following. I think the exam book or something like that, or some book that would give you some idea of what the 1L experience is like, is probably a good thing to do. The exam book, for me at least, is the reason I recommend the exam book, Writing Essay Exams for Succeeding Law School, is because this gives you an idea of what endgame looks like. It's the second week in August. You're starting out classes. That exam you take in December. What are you supposed to do? How are you supposed to study for that? How are you supposed to get ready for that? And if you know what endgame looks like because you've actually seen this whole process explained to you, you've seen sample essay exam answers, you've seen them compared and contrasted in the appendices, then you have, in the book, then you have some idea of what endgame looks like and how to get ready for this. And so that's one thing I would do. If you have interest in practicing in a particular area of law or a particular location, I would give some really strong thought to networking with lawyers who practice in that area, figuring out what they do all day long, getting their reaction to how they like it, what they like about it, what they don't like about it. And those are the most obvious things that come to mind about spending the summer. But spend part of the summer doing something that you're not going to be able to do in the year following when you're in law school.
Yeah, certainly. Make the most of the time. Well, I really appreciate your taking the time with us tonight. Just do me a favor and mention the name of your book again. Maybe type it in the chat as well for those who are interested, and then we'll shift gears and I'll give folks an update on the coronavirus as it applies to LSAT and law school. Okay, it's showing here a typed message here on my system. I'll just type it in. Yeah, go right ahead. Okay. All right, well, thanks again for taking the time, John. Really, really appreciate your sharing with us all of that. All right, folks. So I'm going to share a little bit with you about what's going on with the coronavirus as it applies to the LSAT and law school admissions process this cycle. As we currently stand towards the end of March, LSAC has not yet canceled the April LSAT, although I expect them to do so in the very near future. They said that they will decide by April 10th whether they will go ahead with the April LSAT or not. I expect that they will almost certainly cancel it, given that especially the virus is expected to peak in mid-April. What they did for the March LSAT was they automatically registered everybody for the April LSAT. And for the April LSAT, maybe they'll do the same going forward for June. It's hard to say. We'll see what happens. But if you are planning to take the LSAT in April or possibly June and you want to take it sooner rather than later, I would suggest that you switch your registration now, as soon as possible, for the best possible test center. Because once they cancel April and they re-register everyone for June, whether they do or not, test centers are going to be booked up and you're going to have a hard time finding the most conveniently located central testing centers. Of course, June might be canceled also. We really don't know. Nobody really knows how the pandemic will progress over the next couple of months. We'll see what happens. But the good news is they are letting you change your test registration without any fees associated because, of course, this is a crisis. It's not anyone's personal fault here. So LSAC did indicate ambiguity. They said that they're hopeful about April and June going forward. So we'll see what happens. LSAC has also announced that they are aggressively exploring remote testing, which I interpret to mean administering the LSAT online, which would certainly be unprecedented for them to do. But they're getting creative out of necessity here. So they might administer it online. They might do smaller, more frequent administrations. So they're just experimenting right now. We'll see what happens. They're also getting creative in that they are considering allowing applicants to apply with canceled or expired scores. Most likely, this would only apply for those who have no score on record or no reasonably good score. And as far as what good constitutes, that's really open to LSAC's interpretation. But they don't want this to be a barrier to anybody applying to law school. And so if you have no good score on record or no current score, because scores are good for 5 years, after that they are expired, then they may give you some flexibility with regard to using some old or expired scores. Again, this is all in flux. Nothing is certain. We'll see what happens. And for this group that doesn't have any valid scores, they might do that pilot testing for the online administrations or the smaller, more frequent administrations to see how that works out. Is LSAC able to do tons of small administrations around the country or around the world? Are they able to administer it online without cheating and without tech issues? Lots of unknowns. Nobody really knows what's going to happen, but LSAC does not want this to be a big issue for applicants or for law schools for this cycle or for next cycle. So they're really pulling out all the stops, and I think they're doing everything they can. They're also, on that front, they are working with law schools to extend deadlines for this cycle because they know that many people were counting on taking the March LSAT or the April LSAT and even the June LSAT for this cycle that's finishing up now. And law schools are going to be hurting for applicants relative to how they would otherwise be doing. And of course, applicants are also hurting for applying with another LSAT score. So LSAC is working with those schools. They're doing everything they can, but law school deadlines vary from school to school. So if you're wondering, are schools extending deadlines? Some will, some won't. I think more and more will with time, especially once the April LSAT is canceled, which again, I think it will be, although it hasn't been yet. And so if you want to know, contact each school and ask for details. Lots of unknowns here. Again, no one really knows how the coronavirus will progress. LSAC is kind of following along with the rest of us, and they're not making any specific promises. But in the meantime, stay safe, stay home, and hopefully this thing will pass sooner rather than later. And if you are quarantined, if you are at home, then really try to make the most of this time. Work on your LSAT, work on your applications. Try not to follow the news too obsessively. I know it's really tough. I'm checking the news multiple times a day, especially being in New York City, which is the epicenter right now. But try to limit it. You don't need daily. You don't need hourly updates on this. The world's not going to end within the next hour. Maybe limit it to once in the morning, once in the evening, or once every 4 hours. but have some constraint on yourself that you set out in advance so that you're able to be productive in the meantime and focus on whatever your goals are in the moment. So try to say, I'm going to study for the LSAT for 3 hours, or I'll do one practice test. Then and only then will I look at the news. And also try to get support from friends and family, whoever you are quarantined with, to give you the space and give you the time to study. I know it's really tough to study with all the distractions of not only the news and social media and email, but also the people you're quarantined with at the moment. If you are in fact quarantined, you're staying home, which really I think you should be. Get buy-in from them, have them support you, and make agreements with them that you'll leave them alone for X period of time. They'll leave you alone for Y period of time so that you can get something done. Anyway, that's it for now. I'll keep in touch with you as I find out more as this thing progresses. In the meantime, everyone, again, stay safe, stay home, and I'll be in touch. All the best, everyone, and thanks once again for joining and for your great questions. Good night, everybody. Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them, and feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.